Well, hey there. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite, and I'm very excited to be here with you. I'm the Buck Woody, the original BW, and I'm here with my very good friend and colleague, the amazing mechanic himself, Mr. Bob Ward. Mr. Ward, why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
Buck, so excited to be here with you today. So excited to be part of Microsoft Ignite. Let's make it very clear in the beginning. This could be a very long session if we don't get out of the way that I'm the BW. I don't even know why you think you're a BW. That doesn't make sense. Oh, it is Buck Woody, isn't it?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Well, it's just easier for the people typing in our names. They just put BW and we both showed up. So we'll probably have to share the session, today. Do this as we go. Speaking of sharing the session, we should probably mention what we're talking about today. What do you think? I'm thinking we go to an introduction to Azure Arc enabled data services. This is one of our newest offerings. And so we're announcing this here at Ignite, and you can follow along. And the interesting thing is you can follow along with a module, and there's even a QR code there. But Bob, as you're looking at this slide here, tell me more about this idea of following along with a module. What is that about?
Yeah, Buck, let me show you a little bit more right here. So it's funny how this works out. As you know, I work on everything that has the word SQL in it. You don't see it in this title, right? There is a SQL part of this. We'll talk about that. But I spent some time with my colleague Anna Hoffman and Terry Christiani from the Learn team to build something called Azure SQL Fundamentals. We did that on Learn. Learn is such an amazing platform for customers to get training written by the engineering team. And so you and I have talked about Azure Arc as a technology for a while. And I remember coming to you saying, hey, Buck, should we do a Learn thing on that Arc stuff? I think people would want to see that. And you see in front of you, Buck, here, a link and a QR code where you can go to the Learn module that you and I wrote together to talk about Azure Arc enabled data services.
Yeah. Now, your first Learn module was kind of popular, wasn't it? That series you did with Anna, didn't you get you got a couple of hundred hits or something on that thing?
Yeah, a couple of hundred. People were pinging us amazingly in the community internally at Microsoft, telling us that they were passing certification exams with these things. It's such a great structure to learn because Buck, it all happens in the form of modules and learning paths.
Right.
And we built a module for Azure Arc enabled data services, but guess what? It's part of a learning path on all of Azure Arc, which some of it we'll talk about today.
Yeah, I think we should. Well, I think let's get right to it. Let's jump in here. Let's talk about what our learning objective is. So this is not a typical session, right? We're going to be a little hands-on here and interactive. So we've got some learning objectives. That's the way we put it. When I taught at the University of Washington as a college teacher, we always had learning objectives we had to put forth. And so here's what they are for this module and the session we're doing today. First of all, we'll describe why hybrid computing, we'll even tell you what hybrid computing is an important technology strategy. We'll also talk about what Azure Arc enabled data services is and how that fits into your hybrid strategy. We'll talk about the managed capabilities and some of the benefits of using Azure Arc. And then we'll talk about the managed capabilities and the benefits of using not just SQL Server. So we'll talk about that a bit more. So let's go talk about this live and interactive part here a little bit. But we've got a team, a group of folks who are really super amazing folks. In fact, Bob, as I understand it, these are the folks that wrote Azure Arc enabled data services. They're on the line. Their operators are standing by, waiting to take your comments. And what they're going to do, by the way, periodically is they'll push some of those comments to us, but they're going to answer your questions real time. Now, that's not the only part of Live and Interactive. Make sure you go there and say hello. But there's another part of this. I believe, Bob, if we're going to have learning objectives and if we're going to be all college course on this, we should probably have a few questions and answers here, don't you think?
Buck, there's going to be a test.
There's going to be
during
a test.
The session. Can you believe that? We're actually going to test people's knowledge. I think it's kind of fun. I've done that before. So as we go through and do a lot of talking, you and I like to talk a lot. Everybody knows that. We'll stop for a second and then kind of test your knowledge with some kind of live polling. Is that okay?
I think that's a cool idea. And here's what I think I'm going to do. After I teach my section, I think I may have you take the test live and in front of everybody while everybody else is taking the test. And then
wait, whoa. You mean,
we'll see if you get
during
the
the
right
question,
answer.
you're going to make me answer it?
That's correct.
But
And
you
we'll also
didn't tell
let
me
everybody else answer it at the same time. And
that
once
wasn't
they
in the
do-
pre-thing. We did not agree to that.
That's what we're going to do. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll let you ask me your questions. How's that?
I have some, you know what? I think I'll do that. I think that, you know what? I'm going to put you on the spot too, Buck. There's some stuff later on that I'm going to ask you about. We'll see how really smart you really are, Mr. Professor.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get an introduction going here. Let's talk about first about what we're doing. Many data professionals like today are looking to invest in cloud, right? You and I go way back. I mean, way back. I started on a mainframe, and you as well. And so as we came forward on this, we had everything on premise and centralized. And then, of course, you remember the old days of the LAN, the local area networks, right? And we got rid of the mainframes. Everything got put on PCs, and you had Novell NetWare, and then you had Windows NT and all these things. And then the cloud came around. And so now everything goes to the cloud, everything, all of it, right? Well, maybe not everything. So Bob, we decided we maybe need to talk about this hybrid part a little bit. So why don't you give us a real brief preamble to what we mean when we talk about Azure Arc and hybrid?
Yeah, Buck, I think it's important to set the stage for that term Azure Arc, because I know what you're going to do here in a second is really lay the groundwork for why hybrid computing is important. What are the components of it?
Right.
And what we're going to be able to talk about when you lay that groundwork is that Azure Arc is our Microsoft offering for hybrid platform. You know, Azure is very popular for the cloud, but as you said, some customers are not ready for that. But here's what they want. They want the power of the cloud in the infrastructure of their choice.
Yeah.
And what you're going to find out today, Buck, and I think you kind of know something about this technology, we're going to use Kubernetes as part of that bridge to bring the power of Azure to your infrastructure.
Buzzword bingo. Everybody take a drink. Kubernetes today. We're going to learn about that. So I think that's pretty impressive. Well, Bob, let's tuck in. Why don't we go learn about hybrid computing? All right. What is hybrid computing? It's the latest buzzword, right? What do we mean by that, though, really? Well, what we really mean is this. Hybrid computing just connects on-premises systems, and it's on-premises, not on-prem, on-premises systems to one or more like public clouds, right? Or it could be even a private cloud. It provides one application, an experience, and it also has a single deployment. It also deals with governance, management. It gives you the ability to use your on-prem investments, but also allow you to access cloud benefits. Now, what you always want to do, and this, I'm a data scientist, and so what we always talk about is always put processing over data. You want to always put your processing power right over where the data lives. So this allows you to do that in that hybrid way. With hybrid computing, you also get a uniform security platform, because that is super important. And for the bean counters out there, you get unified billing. They love that. We also want to have some single data collection and a reporting system as well. But Bob, as we talk about this, you know, there are some considerations to do this correctly. Hybrid computing offers a lot of benefits, but there are some considerations about this that we can't just go willy-nilly, add some things in and say, there you go, you're done. It's all stitched together, because it doesn't really work like that. We think about the deployment becomes a little more complicated, because we're deploying things on premises, we're deploying things in Azure, we're doing all these other things. Then we talk about governance, and what that means is really the process of monitoring and controlling your IT to make sure you have the delivery of the value and security in a single organization. And then, of course, we need to manage it. So let's talk about each of those sort of individually, if you don't mind. First, let's talk about deployment. Hybrid computing works best, and I'm going to use a word here, a declarative stateful method of deployment. And most of our folks, Bob, are T-SQL experts. And so they're familiar with the declarative language. They say select star from table. That's all the developers know how to write. That's the ultimate code for a developer, select star from table. Once they do that, they don't have to know where the memory is, the hard drive is, none of those sorts of things. There's an algebraizer, there's a parser, there's all these things that tear apart that statement. You declare what you want, and it happens independent of how it happens. You're worried about what happens. So we'd like the same thing with deployment. We'd like to say, it should look like this, do that. And it figures out how to do that. And you're going to explain, I think, a little bit more about how Kubernetes helps us to do that. Not only that, that deployment needs to be stable. Like I want to make a change, I should be able to just update a file somewhere, say, go do that too, and it will do that for me. So deployment's a big deal when we're talking both on-prem and in the cloud like Azure. Well, that's not the only problem or consideration, shouldn't call it a problem. The next one is governance. And governance is a big new word now, but it's actually a very old word. And in the first step in governing a hybrid system is you have to have a consistent, updated state of deployment like we talked about. We have to make sure updates are applied in a tested, automated fashion, all that kind of thing. DevOps, right? That's the new term. And another important factor in this is the idea of a regulatory status, Bob. Sometimes people are like, hey, I'm over in Europe or I'm in the US or I'm in banking and I need to like give the auditors a little piece of paper that says, yep, everything's good. They need to be able to check my system. And this goes all the way down to the data itself. You've got to be able to govern that data. And finally, we also have management. And this is kind of the bread and butter of where you and I live a lot. There needs to be, I don't want to say single pane of glass. Is that so overused? But there needs to be a consistent way to manage both the things I do on premises and in the cloud. And in fact, I want to do it in multiple clouds. I want to do it the same way. So we're at Microsoft. We have our own cloud. We have our own on-premises. We don't want you to use anybody else's stuff, or do we? We'll talk about that a little bit more. To get that all done, everything I've just described for hybrid computing, that's kind of a tall order to do that. So Bob, why don't you talk a little bit about what we have in that hybrid space?
Yeah, Buck, you know Kubernetes a lot. We've been working that technology for a while, and it is a platform to help you manage containerized applications. We talked about that Azure Arc is going to be that branding of doing hybrid things in a hybrid way. And one of the flavors of that is Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So now your Kubernetes clusters, wherever you want this to be, can connect to Azure. And all of a sudden now things are going to light up in new ways. First of all, you can now view things in Azure about your Kubernetes cluster. But here's what's interesting. This technology provides a series of something called agents that we in the data services technology are going to take advantage of. Now, there's something else, though, that we should set the stage for that you may have heard about that is different than Azure Arc enabled data services. Because Buck and I are SQL people. We have a technology called SQL Server and Azure Arc enabled servers. This is us taking existing SQL servers, Buck, like on Linux or Windows, and connecting that to the cloud. So you can use Azure Arc to enable Azure types of services, kind of like you've heard of maybe Azure or now called Microsoft Defender. You take that Microsoft Defender technology and not just do assessments of for security in the cloud, but do that on your SQL servers using this technology. So Azure Arc enabled SQL servers are SQL servers running outside typically of Azure, your data center, edge, multi-cloud, and then you're attaching Azure Arc to that to make that work. And it's a series of agent softwares that connect itself to the cloud. Buck, you're going to hear that term today a little bit, agents, because those are pieces of software typically that are going to run in your environment to make that connection to the cloud. So with that context in mind, we should talk about, and Buck, just to give the context for the audience here, because we wrote this, right? What we've done so far is showed you for the first couple of modules. We've actually done a presentation for you live. Can you believe that? You've heard the words of Buck Woody. Now you're going to read module 2 and Buck's going to be a little picture in front of your brain. I just can't even imagine that. But now you're going to have a little vision of Bob here, because I actually work quite a bit on this module, which is module 3.
Is that like the little angels that sit on the shoulder?
Yeah, that's right. The little Buck or Bob sitting.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
that's a vision.
By the way, we're seeing in the chat, by the way, people saying hello from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And so everything from Beirut,
that's awesome.
Cairo, salam alaikum in Cairo.
That's awesome.
Hello, everyone. Ciao. All that. Wow, we're just getting people from all over the world. So we're excited to see those folks in line. So we've got Buck and Bob on your shoulder. What are we doing next?
Oh my gosh, Buck. Well, let's actually talk about Azure Arc enabled data services, because you laid the groundwork for hybrid computing with the different aspects of that. I told you about a couple of flavors of Azure Arc.
Right.
And now we're going to differentiate those flavors with this.
Okay.
So here's what it comes down to. Just like the Kubernetes thing we talked about, we'd like to take SQL managed instance, and we'd like to take Postgres hyperscale,
Right.
and deploy those in Kubernetes to give you the feeling of a platform as a service, data service. You've heard of platform as a service, right, Buck?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Platform as a service technologies in Azure. Let's go allow you, and again, we're going to use the power of Kubernetes containers to make that a reality. Now Buck,
is that
you
just
called me a
like one
mechanic, right? What's
Kubernetes,
that?
though? That's like one Kubernetes, though, like ours, right?
Oh, that's the cool part about this. This is any Kubernetes you want, we support. That can be in your data center, your infrastructure, or even in a cloud environment. And but the other thing too is we're going to talk about this a little bit later at the very end to give you some resources.
Yeah,
I know you've worked with this team. There's a team called the Jumpstart team. Maybe you've heard of those guys.
Oh yeah.
They have this crazy, amazing library of automation to help you get started with this technology on just about any Kubernetes you want.
Wow.
And it isn't just Azure Arc enabled data services. They have technology for automation on anything called Azure Arc. So we'll give you a link to that resource at the end of this session.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Now, how does this all fly together, Bob? I mean, you're the mechanic. I always read your books and stuff, and I go to your sessions so I can steal your slides. Do you happen to have something? Do you have leverage?
Right,
do you have anything? Do you have anything I could leverage? I have to deliver this session later. Do you have maybe some icons or something I could borrow that shows how this works?
Well, we're open source presenters, Buck. So everything we do is free for anyone to reuse. But yeah, I don't know. I'm an architect. It's my title, right? I got to show an architecture diagram. Let's do it.
There we go. Okay. There you go.
But let's do it like in a step-by-step fashion. And by the way, for those of you watching, there's a version of this architecture diagram in a pictorial format in the module. And it's got all the details of what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, perfect.
So we talked about Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
So it all starts at step one. You need to bring Kubernetes to the table. Now, here's one big difference between Azure Arc and Azure. We provide the entire infrastructure in Azure regions all over the world, right?
Right.
This is you supplying your hardware, your virtual machines, your Kubernetes of your choice, wherever that's going to exist. You have to start with that. So, Bucky, that's one thing about Arc. You can do a lot of automation with Jumpstart and various things, but we recommend you need to have some knowledge of the Kubernetes platform or somebody who does. To be able to deploy this. And if you look at this diagram here, I've got infrastructure at the bottom, kind of representing whatever your hardware, whatever your environment looks like. Right. And then here I've got nodes. Nodes, you should think of Buck as nodes as being VMs.
Right.
Okay. Like think of your infrastructure as being like a server, and the nodes are being VMs. So I can have one or more of these.
Right.
You're going to find out for our services, we're going to recommend several of these for redundancy purposes and availability purposes.
Right.
Now, Buck, you also see this Kubernetes API thing.
Right.
This is pretty cool. One of the things about Kubernetes that's really amazing is they publish an API for how to control this entire environment from a programming point of view. And what you're going to find is we have deployed containers and software within this environment, and we're going to use the API to control not just things in Kubernetes, but also our resources.
Amazing.
And furthermore than that, you're going to be use popular tools that are going to be able to talk to that API to control and do things with our services.
Okay, well, let's table that for a moment because I want to come back to that one because I'm a tools guy, you know that. Yeah. But let's come back to this. So I've got my infrastructure that can be on-prem, that can be in the cloud. It could even be Cloud X, somebody else's cloud, or your own, is what you're telling me. Right. And then I either get or deploy, or could I do this in like Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS?
Oh, wow. What a great novel idea. You know what, Buck? I might have something to show you later using AKS to do this. But yes, here's the cool thing. That's why I want to emphasize this infrastructure, this Kubernetes, you bring the table, but it doesn't mean you can't use a managed Kubernetes service like OpenShift or AKS.
Wow. Okay, so from Red Hat.
From Red Hat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. OpenShift. So yeah, those are examples. Like you have, by the way, there's an Azure OpenShift offering as well. It's funny because we're talking about bringing the power of Azure to your environment without Azure, but technically you can run that in Azure. So it's kind of weird to say that, but that's actually true.
I mean, who would have thought of a world, Bob, years ago where Microsoft would have an official supported offering that works with Linux and Red Hat?
It's crazy, Buck. But remember, we said multi-cloud.
Okay, fair enough.
So
Fair
it
enough.
could be
Okay.
deployed in a different cloud environment than even Azure.
So far, this looks like Kubernetes to me. I'm familiar with Kubernetes. I'm
Yeah.
cool here. Nodes are computers. APIs, how you talk to everything. Infrastructure's hardware. Got it. So what do I do now?
Okay, step 2.
Okay.
You're going to deploy something called an Azure Arc Data Controller. And you'll notice if you're to the right, Buck, we are going to use the Microsoft Container Registry because guess what? In Kubernetes, everything's a container.
Yeah.
You've seen the containers, right? The power of containers.
Right.
Everything's a container. So we are going to deploy all of our container images to run this entire environment in Kubernetes. And then we're going to use the container registry, Buck, because it's secure and we can ensure it. We do security checks on that, right? So we don't want any container image to come into this environment that has not gone through a security check you can trust and rely on. So we're going to use the Microsoft Container Registry when you deploy this Azure Arc Data Controller.
Wow.
So this data controller, Buck, is really important. This is like a brain thing, okay?
Yeah.
Think of this as a series of pods. Remember that concept in containers? A series of pods that do a lot of controlling, hence the term.
Okay.
Kind of like a control plane idea.
Right.
Within Kubernetes. But this isn't Kubernetes. This is our container images.
Oh, okay.
And the key thing is, Buck, it'll use the Kubernetes API to control things. So this is a key brain component. Notice it's agnostic to data technology.
Sure.
This doesn't say SQL on it or anything, right?
Right.
It is a key component for various things. And we'll see in a second, like some of the things it actually does.
Okay.
So you kind of get that?
I got it so far. I'm with you. The data control's new, but I get it. And I see that registry out there and I have a question, but you may answer it. So keep going.
Okay. So number 3. Whoa, that really lit up now.
Okay, here we go.
Let's use this to really highlight some stuff now because it's getting kind of crazy now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, number 3 is going to deploy an Azure Arc Data Service. And 2 examples of those are SQL Managed Instance and Hyperscale. And here's what you're going to do, Buck. Now, I gotta lay the landscape here. You're going to do that using the Azure Portal or CLIs.
Got it.
Now, let me stop and make a very important point about a concept that matters here. Notice these green and red denotion for what's called direct and indirect modes.
Yeah, what is that?
Okay, so direct mode is when you are going to tie in your Kubernetes deployment, your Arc deployment, with the cloud in a direct way, and it's going to be connected all the time.
Got it. Okay, got it.
So customers are comfortable. You can use proxies.
Sure.
But customers are comfortable in these scenarios to say, I want to be connected to Azure all the time. That's called direct mode. Okay.
Right.
You have some customers that say, hold on a second. I don't mind uploading things to Azure every once in a while, but I'm not going to always just be connected together. That's called indirect connected mode.
Got it.
So in direct connected mode, I can go into the Azure portal and there's something called an Azure Arc Resource Provider. That's a concept that's all over Azure.
Yep.
We have the concept of a resource provider. We have specific resource providers for Azure Arc.
Okay.
So you go into the portal and say, I'd like to deploy a data controller.
Got it.
You can go in the portal and do that if you're in this direct connected mode.
Got it. Okay.
Now, what you're going to see in a second is that to be in direct connected mode, you're going to have to use, guess what? Azure Arc Kubernetes. I'm going to bring that into the fold in a second, okay?
Okay, all right.
Now, in indirect connected mode, you can use CLIs like the AsCLI, which we have an extension for, and kubectl. kubectl, Buck.
kubectl. It's kubectl. Everybody.
This is going to be a problem, folks. I'm sorry, it's going to be a problem all session long.
Everybody calls it kubectl.
I've always called it a cuddle here. I don't know why you say that.
I always called it kubectl. That's what it's called.
By the way, Buck, this is a key thing of why we're using the Kubernetes API. Because we use that API, you can use kubectl to do anything you want with our technology. You can use, you know what I'm talking. You can use. You've used to using these templates, right? With Kubernetes,
right.
You can use because we have all those things built for you to do that. Or you can use you can install the AsCLI in your environment. You connect into your Kubernetes. There's a way to do that with AsCLI. And then you go use our extensions to deploy things. So you can do that in indirect mode if you'd like.
I see.
But you can do that in direct mode if you wanted to. But for direct mode, you can actually use the portal to make this work. So here's the landscape. You got your Kubernetes cluster.
Right.
You deployed your controller in direct or direct mode. You have a series of pods now running in your environment. Now you go through and say, I'd like a managed instance.
Okay.
Didn't you say something about a declarative way of doing something?
Yeah, the declarative way. Now that's like if I wanted to set this up in a certain way, that was one of the questions I have. Normally you use a Kubernetes manifest. Can I mess with that as well? Can I still
Yes. So that since we're using the APIs, we've published you can use manifest with kubectl to do anything I'm talking about here. Now that would be indirect connected mode when you're going to do that, right?
Right.
Or if you didn't want to do that, we have these as CLI extensions. Again, that's still command line. And of course, the beauty here, if people don't remember or know this, this is all cross-platform. I can do it from a MacBook, from Linux, from Windows. I can do it from the Cloud Shell book.
Wow.
Hello, Texas. Yeah, there we go. Or again, I can just use the portal, which again also is browser-based or tool-based or phone-based. Hey, Buck, that'd be kind of cool. We need to show how to deploy.
We should do that.
My phone.
I got to get one of those. I don't have a smartphone. I've got just the regular phone, the Candlestick. Now, you said that the Azure Data Controller, then it wakes up, talks to Azure, does its thing. I'm interacting with AZ CLI or kubectl. And then I say, hey, I would like a managed instance. And you're telling me that's going to come from the Microsoft Container Registry. And this comes to my question.
Yeah.
You guys can keep it, meaning Microsoft can keep it updated. And I can do updates this way, yeah?
Wow, what a novel concept. Yes, one of the benefits of platform as a service for Azure is that you have automatic updates, right? It's an evergreen system typically that you work with, like you work with Azure SQL managed instance.
Right.
You're going to find out the same thing here.
Okay.
For using the container registry, we're going to be able to, in an indirect way, allow you to download it, or in direct way, just do it for you to keep this all updated with no patching required. How cool is that?
That is very cool. That is very cool. And you know, Bob, all the things that I mentioned that you have to have for hybrid computing, we're checking them off here.
We're checking them off.
We got a consistent interface. We got a secure. We're deploying declaratively. We're keeping it updated and in a constant state. Kubernetes helps us do that. And we're independent, since I can put the Kubernetes on-prem and I can put Kubernetes in the cloud. But we're not done yet here, right? I mean, I've got managed instance running. So what?
Well, to be clear here, one thing about the controller, it's within the Kubernetes cluster. The controller has no conversations with Azure. It's all doing things inside this entire environment.
Okay.
But here's the key piece. Oh, hello. It lit up some stuff now. Look at these green arrows all of a sudden, and these red arrows. What's going on here?
Yeah, show me what's happening.
Yeah, okay. So remember we talked about this indirect and connected. Let me use my little let me use my laser pointer here. I love this little laser pointer thing. Okay, so in indirect connected mode, let's say I went that way. I didn't connect to Azure, but I want to still get things into Azure. Remember, part of this is the integration you talked about, the management piece, right?
Right.
Well, I can use like a CLI to say, you know what? I would like you to upload into Azure my inventory, like what am I running, my logs, my metrics, my billing information. Oh, by the way, Buck, I forgot to tell you that this Azure SQL managed instance here, you are now paying for SQL Server in a cloud subscription model.
Oh, nice.
What? Wait, what?
Are you telling me you just fixed the licensing question?
Well, I don't know if it's fixed or not, but I mean, it is a way now to have a SQL managed instance that you normally have in Azure, you play in a subscription way. Now you do that with SQL here, right? Right. So and we're going to talk about SQL managed instance and compare that to SQL.
Yeah, you're going to have to show me. I'm still a little fuzzy about managed instance, Azure SQL.
I'll explain that in a second. But the key thing here is that the way my tie into Azure works is that I can use the CLI to say, hey, let me export and upload when I want to this information. And the controller is a key piece to collect data from these to do that. Yeah. Okay. Now that's the red arrow. That's
now my administrators can the people that are looking out in Azure in the portal, they're seeing all those metrics like it was in Azure. They're getting all the cool billing. They're getting, they can see, there's a performance issue or whatever, but this thing's sitting out somewhere where they can't touch.
Isn't that amazing? And by the way, remember that thing called Azure RBAC? You have RBAC control going here. Well, that kind of speaks down to this. Let's talk about the green arrow side. Okay. So let's say I'm in this direct connected mode. And by the way, Buck, when you do deployment, you decide which mode you're in. Okay. You have that choice, right? Okay. In case somebody's wondering, like, well, how do I know which mode I'm in? Like, you make that decision during the deployment process. Right. And what's cool about the Jumpstart guys is they have all the automation to do all this. Of course, but if you want to go through, we're showing like a step-by-step process. Right. I'm sure Lior is looking at this going like, he's screaming going, but wait a minute, Jumpstart just does this. We're showing you the pieces so you can understand how it all works together. Right. But so in direct connected mode, when you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to actually connect your Kubernetes to Azure, and that's where the Azure Arc agents come from. So now this becomes an Azure Arc Kubernetes cluster, okay? And because you have those agents, guess what? We know how to talk to that. So now this inventory logs metrics billing that we collect, the agents can pick it up and put it into the cloud.
Amazing. Now, automatically, am I going to get all of the cool stuff? Like, do I get security audits? And do I get security audits?
Well, look at this though. You're going to get information about our system that you would normally see from an Azure deployment. But also the Arc agents can push things down using Kubernetes APIs like deployments. This is how. So let's say I want to deploy the controller in direct connected mode. I will connect my Kubernetes cluster. I'll go to the portal and I will say, oh, I'd like a controller. And our Azure Arc agents using Kubernetes API will make that work.
Amazing.
Or I want to deploy a managed instance. So once this piece is here, when you've connected Kubernetes to Arc, you can then do things in here, and this will take care of it for you behind the scenes, including enforcing Azure RBAC, which is role-based access control. So I now have enforcement at the Azure level of what I'm doing in my Arc environment.
That's really cool. And I can see my performance things and all kinds of, and I get my logs up there because I've got all the log analysis. So I put a lot of work into developing some dashboards for logging, mainly because as I use these things, my boss and your boss says, what are you spending all this money on? And I can, so I can show them. And so I actually get these logs from my system that's on-prem in Red Hat, and I can see that in Azure in that one, I hate to say it, pane of glass, but I can.
Yes. Okay. So now think of now seeing all of what we're talking about here in Azure, along with all my other Azure assets.
Okay. This is quite a bit of work.
There's one other thing, Buck.
What's the deal? I was going to say, we got to talk about the tools. You got to get me to the tools.
Well, I'll talk a little bit of tools in a second, but let me just show you briefly that you saw the SQL thing over here, right?
Yeah.
The Postgres thing.
Yep.
I mean, you're Buck Woody. You write applications.
That's right.
I'm sure you want to write some code.
I do.
So guess what? These are the standard protocols and interfaces that you know and love for Postgres and SQL. Okay. You're a T-SQL guy. You're a TDS app person.
Yep.
You can write your app towards it, right? You want to use database tools like Management Studio, you can do it. Oh, and by the way, there's something called Azure Data Studio.
Right.
Extensions even in Azure Data Studio to manage this whole thing. So yeah, the tools you know and love connect with the services here, just like they were services in Azure or on-prem based on SQL or Postgres. So that's the complete story of deploying this and then also being able to see it.
Very cool. Okay.
All right. Let's talk about the interface.
Let's talk about the tools. Yeah.
I just want to make sure you know about the tools. So, because you use that silly term before that nobody uses. So
kubectl. Yeah. kubectl.
So again, Azure Portal, a lot of people like to use the Azure Portal in direct connected mode. You can do that. And again, once you connect your Kubernetes cluster to Azure, all that lights up.
Right.
The AzCLI, very popular, works on cross-platform in the Cloud Shell. We have something called the Arc Data Extension in the AzCLI. When you install this extension now in the AzCLI, different options light up for you to do various things with the data controller, managed instance, and Postgres. And then, as you said, we allow Manifest to be used with kubectl. And because we're using the APIs and everything we do, it's a really great protocol system. We fully support you doing this. In fact, there are some things that we recommend you use this for to go change things like backup retention strategies.
Right.
Now, we just talked about the other tools though, right?
Right.
Like you're a SQL guy. I'm a SQL guy. So I want to use Management Studio. I want to use SQL command line tools, all supported, because for SQL, the managed instance is the same SQL engine used in Azure SQL Managed Instance and in SQL Server. Right. And then Azure Data Studio, very popular tool nowadays, cross-platform, that can connect to SQL Server. So it connects to this. Right. And there's even an extension there to actually kind of look at the Azure Arc deployment inside the cluster with some pretty cool things I'll show you later. What do you think about this?
You know what? We're at 30 minutes in. I think we should take a test.
Oh,
yeah. I'm gonna give you a test. All right. Tell you what. I'm gonna give you this one. Let me get my professor hat on. Hold on a second.
Now, Buck, are you actually suggesting that the audience is gonna try to answer this?
The audience should answer this.
Oh, there's like a poll. There's going to be a poll that's
there's a poll thing. There's a poll thing.
Okay.
So they're going to start answering.
But I didn't know this was coming. I get to, okay, great. Let me look.
I'm going to go through each question. I'm going to wait a couple minutes and let everybody kind of clock in. This is kind of like, what is it, Jeopardy? But
are you going to see the poll and see what everybody says?
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
They'll tell me or something. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Mr. Ward, which component of Kubernetes does Azure Arc enabled services use? A, the Kubernetes API, which stands for Application Performing Index. No, it doesn't. The AZ-CLI, kubectl, or the Azure Arc agents. Now, I'm going to give you a little countdown. I'm going to play this. No, I can't play the song because we'd probably have to pay somebody if I paid this song.
Like the Jeopardy song or something?
I think we have to pay somebody if we did the Jeopardy song. All right, here we go. Okay. I'm going to give you what the audience thinks in just a second. But the audience is 63% sure on one answer.
Okay.
And they're split between 15% on two other answers.
So is this like a dun dun dun?
Yeah, it's like that.
Okay.
It's like that. Okay. All right. So is it A? Is it B? Is it C or is it D? Bob, we'll go ahead and lock you in now.
Okay. So Buck, have you seen me do this before? I use like process of elimination. Do you ever used to do that? I used to do it multiple choice all the time. It works really well for me. Of course, you narrow things down and you're like, oh, which one is it? So we say here the key component of Kubernetes. That's a key thing here. So I'm going to eliminate B and D. I'm going to remove that because they're not components of Kubernetes.
There you go.
Azure Arc agents are our software running on Kubernetes, and AZ-CLI is not a component; it's a tool, right? At least I think it's a tool. So that leaves A and C. So C, this kubectl thing, is a tool to me, not a component. So I'm going to vote A, the Kubernetes API. That's what I mean.
Nicely done. And Bob, that is the correct answer. A is the correct answer. The Kubernetes API.
How did our audience do?
I don't have a clap sound. 63% picked A. 22% picked D.
We're hanging in there.
11% picked C. And 4% picked B. So we did pretty good.
Okay.
So we got that. So let me go to another one in case of time, because we got to move on here, Bob. I'm going to give you another question. I want to give you another question.
This was hard,
which connected mode supports the Azure Resource Manager? Is it A, indirect connected mode, B, direct connected mode, or C, Azure connected mode? So take your time.
I
don't know. Some answers back from our audience. We're getting some answers back. Which connected mode supports the Azure Resource Manager? Indirect, direct, or Azure connected mode? All right, we're locking in. We have a few seconds left. We've got 18 votes so far, 19 votes coming in. Bob, why don't you 28 votes coming in, Bob. It's closing in. I feel like doing what is the Kentucky Derby thing? I don't know how to do it. 29 votes coming in.
Down the stretch.
38 votes, Bob. We got 38 votes coming around the corner. Okay. We're going to go ahead and lock in. Let's start with your 46. So I hear 50, 60 votes going once, going twice. All right, Bob,
you ready?
Let's circle in. Let's circle in. What you got?
Process elimination. I mentioned two connected modes, and Azure connected mode is not a thing.
That's true.
So
that's true.
Eliminating that
one.
I'm left with these first two. So here's the thing. Azure Resource Manager is in Azure, and Azure Resource Manager lights up the ability to deploy things in Azure through like the portal. Right. And we said that you had to be in direct connected mode to do that. So I'm going to say the answer is B.
And you are correct. 65% of our audience, 116 votes, picked direct connected mode. The rest picked Azure connected mode. Somebody out there is not listening. Bob never said Azure connected mode.
Yeah.
All right. That's okay. That's okay. That's a little made up. Okay. That's a little made. All right. Well, I think what we should do, we should talk a little bit about that managed instance. Now we're about 35 or 40 minutes in, so work accordingly. But I think I need to understand a little more. There's Azure SQL, there's managed instance, and there's SQL Server. And can you help me understand this?
Well, Buck, I need to explain to you things all the time, so it makes sense that I would need to do this. But remember the modules, right?
Okay. Yep.
You started out, you talked about hybrid computing to set the foundation. We just talked about Azure enabled data services and the overall use of the data controller and Kubernetes. And we had those little diagrams of those two services there, right?
Right.
So one of them is Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance. That's a mouthful. We need an acronym for that thing or something, right? So Buck, as you know, that little word SQL in there, I've spent a few years on that technology, so I kind of know something about it a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to compare Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance.
This is useful. This is useful
to other Azure SQL services. Okay, because I've done this before when I've talked Azure SQL. Now remember the context here. The thread is the word SQL in here, which is SQL Server. So it's a common engine running across all of this.
Oh, the same engine on all these. So my T-SQL works.
In the cloud, though, SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine is literally the SQL engine at a version level that you control. Right. So it's SQL 16, SQL 19. We just announced SQL 2022. SQL 12, whatever you want. In a VM, we host the infrastructure in Azure.
Right.
You own the VM. Okay, the operating system, SQL Server. So people want that option because they need to control what is the version of SQL Server OS they're using.
Right.
But they take advantage of the fact that Azure hosts the infrastructure, the storage, the networking, redundancy, all those things. Now, Azure SQL Managed Instance is a full SQL Server instance, but it's called Platform as a Service because you don't care about the VM, you don't care about the OS. You just get a full SQL server, including things like SQL Agent. So it's an instance level thing with a bunch of databases.
Right there in the name, then it's an instance.
But here's the key. Platform as a Service means you get automatic backups, built-in high availability. You get a versionless SQL server. There's no version. We update this thing all the time, right?
Okay. All right. All right.
But Azure SQL database is just a database.
Right.
So it's kind of like Azure SQL Managed Instance where you don't worry about the instance anymore. You see some visibility of that connecting to it, but you think more of a contained database. That's your world. Very popular for developers who are spinning up cloud-born apps. And it offers some really cool technology like serverless and hyperscale. You've ever heard of those kind of things, right?
Sure.
But it's not an instance. There's no SQL agent. There's no replication. There's no resource governor. All that stuff at the instance level. There's no machine learning services, right?
Database per. It's right there in the name. Got it. Okay.
So it lends itself, and notice the way we did the icons here. Notice that the Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance looks like the second one with that little disk at the bottom. Yeah. And that little disk at the bottom represents your infrastructure.
Right.
So we're going to give you the things I told you, platform as a service.
Right.
But we're going to run it in your Kubernetes infrastructure that you've deployed for us. We're going to take advantage of the data controller, and we're going to use container images to give you that feel of a versionless SQL server.
That really helps. Does
that make sense?
It does. And now, I'm super excited because I'm always super excited. You know that. But now I want to start playing with it.
Yeah. How do you get started? Right. So I kind of showed you a little bit of that architecture diagram, but man, you can get lost in architectures a little bit. Right. So here is Bob's step-by-step easy approach. Again, Lior, if you're listening, we know Azure Arc Jumpstart's amazing. He's still waving. He's probably waving. Can I get on camera and talk about Jumpstart? Right. We love
Jumpstart. Is so cool. By the way, look that up. And by the way, I think that's even in our module.
Oh, it's in our module. It's F-referenced several times. And at the end, we'll give you a reference to that, right? Yeah. So I'm going to start with the fact that I have Azure. That's an important thing. I've got an Azure subscription, which, by the way, we didn't really kind of mention. You have to have that, right? Because we said it's a cloud billing model.
Well, sure.
So even if you're in indirect connected mode, Buck, you still have to eventually connect to Azure to upload so we can bill you.
Makes sense. Yep. I got that.
Okay. But as we talked about earlier, I got to deploy Kubernetes.
Why is it K8S? Wait a minute. What?
Well, that's the lazy person's, it's K Kubernetes S, K 8 letters S. You knew that, right?
So somebody invented a technology, gave it a bizarre name, and then thought that was too long and shortened it.
Oh, I promise you, it's Brendan Burns tired of typing in that term when he worked at Google. Like he tired of typing in the word Kubernetes like 7 million times, and somebody said K8S. I'm sure that's where it all started from. Okay, all right. You got to deploy that first. You got to bring that to the table, but don't forget, Buck, all the flavors. We talked about OpenShift. We talked about AKS.
No, I love that.
Rancher, Google, Amazon, all the different Kubernetes. By the way, you can even do, Buck, the little known thing here, you can do your own Kubernetes. You've heard of like upstream Kubernetes, open source Kubernetes. Right. People said like, wait a minute, what about the open source stuff? The only thing I would caution folks there is when you go that path, you're on your own. You have to support everything about the open source Kubernetes, but it is true. You could actually, we do support that.
Sure.
Okay. So that's where it starts. Now, in direct connected mode, as we talked about, I'm going to connect Kubernetes to Azure. There is some interesting technology here, Buck, that we haven't mentioned in the architecture diagram called a custom location. Okay. A custom location in this technology is telling Azure, hey, there's actually like an Azure resource that's not in Azure. Now, I mentioned AKS is technically in Azure, right? But a custom location is a way to tell Azure there's some sort of custom location for my resources, not that you really don't know about.
Right.
And so part of this is to establish that custom location.
Got it.
And those Azure Arc agents are installed and deployed as pods in your Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Thirdly, I'm going to deploy my data controller.
Right.
We talked about the fact you can do that through the portal, or you can do that through AsCLI or kubectl. I'll use that term for you, Buck. In your Kubernetes cluster, if you want to use like indirect connected mode. And by the way, the AsCLIs have a very specific extension to tell you how to do that. And you're going to make some choices when you go through that process. But I want my managed instance, right? We just talked about. And so now I'm going to deploy it. Again, I can do that several different ways. I can do that through the portal. I can do it as CLI or kubectl. And Buck, I'm going to give you a little hint here. Look at the 3 little SQL things there. Guess what? One of the options you're going to get to do is to deploy managed instance in a declarative way, which you'll like, and get myself a built-in availability group without actually saying I want an availability group. So that's pretty cool.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the 4th thing. And then I just want to connect and manage it, right?
Perfect.
I got to, and so this is interesting about this connect part right here.
Yeah.
I want to somehow just connect to the thing, and we'll talk about how do you figure that out, because today in SQL Server land or in Azure SQL, you're told how to connect. You're like, okay, here's the URL to use for this Azure service, or here's the server name to go after, right?
Right.
We'll talk about, since you're going to be in Kubernetes,
right?
We're going to use a concept called a load balancer. I've heard of those before.
Yeah.
And we're going to give you connection abstraction to connect into this SQL managed instance.
Okay. Well, this is amazing. I mean, my mind's pretty much blown. So we got about 30 minutes left. Let's do this. Let's talk about let's compare some of this stuff so I understand what's going on. And then if you could kind of tell me where my service levels or tiers are kind of at. And then if you want to go through some of the management stuff, I don't know how quickly you could do that stuff. But
let's do it very quickly. Let's just go through it briefly, because core features is an easy one, Buck. It's the same. Hello.
Oh, okay.
It's the same core, but column store is across all of this stuff.
Okay. Oh, nice.
Store index. You want intelligent query processing, it works across everything because it's the same core SQL engine, right?
Very cool.
We'll talk about tiers in a second. And by the way, that's going to line up very nicely with Azure SQL Service tiers in managed instance. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, the Azure integration piece. That is, we talked about the logs, the billings, the metrics, all that stuff is a key part of this, whether you use direct or incorrect connected mode.
Okay.
Now, I know there's a lot to look at right here, and we're still kind of continuing to evolve this. Notice that business critical says the word preview, but let me just lay it down for you.
Okay.
Business critical is like, think of it like enterprise edition in this environment.
Okay.
You pretty much get everything you want.
That helps.
And then look at this, an availability group, Buck.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the same thing for Azure SQL Managed Instance. We'll show you that in a second. General purpose, think of that like standard edition. Some limitations on how many cores you can use and memory.
Okay.
And then you still get availability, though. You still get built-in availability. Buck, you should think of it as a failover cluster instance without installing a failover cluster instance.
Right.
You know why? Kubernetes gives that for you.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Just deploying Kubernetes because you have shared storage, and we use that.
Right.
Kubernetes has built-in availability. That's really nice. So even in general purpose, if you're worried, I don't get high availability, you do. It's just not as highly available because you don't get replicas.
Right.
So that is the basic. And then, Buck, look at this down here. Do you see down here the dev test pricing thing? What is that all about? We support developer edition towards this technology. So if you want to do dev testing, the SQL cost is free because you can use developer edition. Now, that's not for production use, obviously.
Right.
But if you want to spin up an Azure Arc SQL managed instance for development test purposes, you don't have to pay any SQL license cost to do that. That's way cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is. And you said
what about the management stuff?
Yeah, you are something.
Right. Buck, have you ever heard the word versionless?
I've heard of that, and I is it a buzzword? I mean, what is it
reality?
Really, yeah, what does it really mean?
I'll tell you exactly what it is. Because I talk out in the Azure SQL world all the time. No more patching. You don't patch anything anymore. Versionless is us giving the capability with container images, kind of like we do in Azure in a different way.
Right.
You don't worry about patching anymore. It's all versionless. You get the latest updates for the technology we deploy. That is so amazing. But people love that in Azure. And we're bringing that capability into Azure SQL Managed Instance for Arc. And then deployment and configuration are similar. It's declarative, right? You talked about. And configuration is interesting because configuration is going to be inside and outside SQL. So outside SQL, you use like the as CLI stuff we talked about.
Right.
And eventually we'd like to light that all up in the portal. And then if you do it inside SQL, all the T-SQL you know and love just works. SP configure, T-SQL commands, all those things.
Interesting.
Now for monitoring, you're going to be able to use the Azure portal.
Yeah, no, I love that.
You also can use technology that is native to Kubernetes and Linux and container systems called a Grafana. You can do Grafana dashboards inside your cluster. So if you're not in direct connected mode, you still can do some monitoring of things going on in Kubernetes. We mentioned about high availability. You get built-in high availability no matter what service tier you pick. You get availability groups, or you get like failover cluster instance. And then in Azure SQL, one of the things that people love is we do automated backups and point-in-time restore. We have it. We have built-in high disaster recovery in Azure SQL Managed Instance. The one difference is that you need to manage the redundancy of where the backups go. So tell us where the backups go. In Azure Cloud today, we manage the redundancy for that. Azure Storage, right? You're going to support the storage here, but automated backups are here, Buck, and point-in-time restore, all part of this technology.
You know, Bob, have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? You ever heard of this?
I have.
And so, this guy is like in a dream world. He's in a metaverse, and a metaverse. You may have seen this.
Yeah.
I actually believe you're not real right now. And I'll tell you why. I believe that you are not, in fact, Bob Ward. This is all a simulation. And I'll tell you why, Bob. I don't believe you, a word of you, because you haven't shown me a demo. And
wait a minute.
I have never been. I've never been to a Bob Ward session in my life where you don't do a demo and show us. And I don't want something recorded. I want it live.
What about that?
Let me see.
Not recorded. I'm moving my mouse all over.
No, you're not.
No, I'm in Azure. And
okay.
Buck, I went in and looked at the word Azure Arc and look at all this stuff I just talked about. What if I click that?
Okay.
It work. Buck, there's a data controller that I've deployed. I've deployed that in my Kubernetes cluster. Okay, that is running in this environment. But look down here. You're like, well, what about a Kubernetes cluster? I have it. I have an Azure Arc Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
Up, and then the piece de resistance, I have a managed instance. So if I click here and look at my managed instance now, I can actually go drill in and see, okay, what is this managed instance thing? Well, look at that. I have the name of the controller. I have the location of the region because I'm uploading data, and I have an endpoint here. Guess what, Buck? That's how I'm going to connect to my SQL server. And then I told you I promised metrics. Bob, you're lying. Here's SQL Server. How about CPU usage? Okay, get ready for this. That's the CPU usage running in my cluster, not in Azure.
Okay, got it.
But I'm connected to Azure, so we upload. You can see that information. That's called an Azure Monitor experience. So I can see that in Azure SQL Managed Instance today. It feels like Azure to me, right?
So if I were on-prem with my Kubernetes, I'm running Red Hat, and I connect and I do direct connected mode, I would see the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this particular Kubernetes happens to be Azure Kubernetes, right? But it could be any Kubernetes.
Okay.
So I am running this in Azure only for easy demonstration purposes. I could have put this in Red Hat in my own on-premises environment and then connected it to Azure, and I would see my Kubernetes service here. I would see Kubernetes Azure Arc, I wouldn't see this. And the Kubernetes Azure Arc would be reflective of what I've got deployed in my environment.
That's so cool.
Now, Buck, that's interesting. That's Kubernetes on Azure. You didn't believe me that it was live. This is Management Studio connected. Hello, Texas. Azure Arc managed it. Look at that. That is me connecting to that endpoint I talked to you about, right? So that I'm just running a query against this instance. Now, I told you that I might have a built-in availability group if I pick business critical, which I did.
Right.
This, Buck, is the read-only replica I'm connected to. And you're like, prove it. Well, look at this. Always on availability. Let me click here. Primary, secondary.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, you're also saying to yourself, Bob, I love that technology, but one of the things that drives me crazy is SQL agent jobs don't get replicated. Buck, here's agent. Let me see if I got to refresh this. Jobs. Oh, where'd my job go? I had a job. Oh, you know what? Oh, I know. Why don't I just create one then?
Okay, yep, that's unfortunate.
Go ahead. No, on the fly. My job. Okay. I don't put the steps. I just create the job just to get into the metadata.
I see. The reason you didn't have any is you were going to show off.
There it is. So, that's interesting, but is it over here in the replica? This is live, Buck. Is this going to work? Buck, there it is.
Look at
My
that.
job.
That's awesome. That's
Look at
pretty
that.
cool.
So there we go. My job, my job. Right.
Okay.
So it's
All right.
it's the ability now to have the system database as part of my availability group. So that's all interesting, Bob. You're all showing up. What about Azure Data Studio?
Yeah, I want to see Azure Data Studio.
Okay, this is me connected to the SQL part, but here's this cool technology we've added for the data controller in the managed instance.
Nice.
So I get information about my deployment
How cool
in
is
Azure
that?
Data Studio. I don't have to be in the portal now to see that. And I promised you metrics. How about this?
Wow.
I'm running this, Buck, inside the cluster from a client, not in the portal. This
Right.
looks like Perfmon to you, right? I can even go at the host level for the Kubernetes cluster and get CPU utilization, memory utilization about my cluster.
Very cool. Yeah, I love this tool. I love Grafana and Kibana.
Now,
Just-
you have always said to me, but I'm a Kubernetes guy, right?
Yep.
Well, let's see and prove if I am as well. I'm going to take a look at pods in my cluster. Look at this. These are actual Kubernetes pods. These are like the controller stuff.
Right.
You see that there?
Yep.
But here are the pods in something called a stateful set.
I
that are running my my managed instance for the
And there's my
availability group.
redundancy, right? That's my
Yeah.
redundancy.
And then I can do this. I can say Azure Arc, all
Okay.
live. And these are the Azure Arc agent pods. So it's a different namespace in Kubernetes, all running this. So,
Very cool.
Buck, I told you about built-in availability for Kubernetes.
Right.
Because we use stateful sets, we have built-in availability. So if a pod dies or a node dies, we just flip over to the other one and just start up and run again, right? And we're using replicas here. So failover is much faster because we've got replicated data. So you didn't believe I was going to do it live, did you?
No, I was trying to trip you up. So I tell you what, I'm going to trip you up anyway. Let's go take a test.
Wait. Oh my gosh. Buck.
Yep.
But
Take a test.
I don't know the answer to these. So
Okay,
Oh
here
my
we go.
God.
Ready?
okay, here we go. Here we go. First test.
Okay,
First,
audience. Okay, it's your turn to play along with
Here we go.
Bob.
here we go.
Which service tiers provide high availability with replicas using always on availability groups? Now, that last part of the sentence, Bob, is important. Is it A, general purpose, B, enterprise, or C, business critical? We've got answers coming in from the audience, and they're
Okay.
pretty strong. They have a definite opinion here, Bob. So I
Do they?
hope that, they do. Some of these folks, we got 19 votes so far. We'll
Okay.
give it a couple moments. You be thinking about your process of elimination.
I am. I'm going to. Yeah, I got it
and
down. I know what I'm doing.
You know what you're going to do. All right, we're up to 22 votes so far. They usually come in big chunks as this
Waves.
update. 26, 33
That's
votes. Do I hear 50?
Was there early voting on this, Buck? Or
No, it's Florida. We'll be
Oh.
recounting. Yeah, we'll
We're
be
recounting.
recounting.
Okay,
We'll be
got it.
recounting all these
okay,
votes.
all right. Here we go. Here we go.
55 votes. Here we
Okay.
go. Okay, we're gonna wait and let the next batch roll in. 63.
Okay,
One more batch, and after that batch, I want you to do your 80 votes. All right.
go for it,
As they still come in, let's walk down
Okay.
the list.
Buck. Enterprise is an addition, not a service tier. And I
Okay.
only called out two, which is A and C.
Okay.
And I specifically showed a table showing an availability group as part of C, business
You did.
critical. So that's going to be the answer for me.
And that was the choice of 118 people. 79% picked
That's
C.
awesome. That's
business
awesome.
critical.
But
So-
don't forget, Buck, general purpose has high availability built in, but it just doesn't use replica technology. It's like a failover cluster instance.
I can't catch you out. All right, here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Let's do another question. You can view billing metrics and logs for Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance in the Azure portal using indirect connected mode. True or false?
My colleague Anna Hoffman always messes me up. She always does these weird questions where it's like, something that is, you got to read carefully. But she always makes me read carefully questions. So I got to read this carefully. Okay. Portal using indirect connection. Okay. I think I know my answer. Let's see what
All right,
the
our audience is a bit divided on this one, Bob.
Are they?
We have a 65-35 split so far. So let's wait
Okay.
and let folks get in.
So not consensus on this one.
Not yet. I'm gonna let my cat Tina. She is checking the poll. If you take a
Oh,
look,
okay. Tina looks really interested in what we're doing. I can
Tina
tell. Yeah.
is checking the poll.
Yeah, got it.
What do we think? What are the answers? She's still checking. She said there's only 51 votes. Wait.
Doesn't look very interested in this, Buck. I don't.
She's not always interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes she is, sometimes she's not.
Yeah.
All right. Tina the Cat says you're at your 80 votes.
Okay.
You may, this one, you don't do process of elimination. It's just, which is it, Bob? Flip a coin.
But, billing, metrics, and logs, we talked about as a key part of the integration of Arc with Azure.
Right.
And we specifically showed a diagram earlier. We talked about integration here in one of our slides that you can do this. And it's automatic with direct connected mode, and it's manual, but you can do it with indirect connected mode.
So it doesn't have the word automatic.
True. I'm going to say true.
Bob, the answer is true. We had 58% of the audience at 127 votes that believe also that it's true. And we had some folks, I think they got tripped up on the word automatic. I think that's what it is.
Here's the deal. The difference, Buck, is it's a frequency thing. So in direct connected mode, we're always kind of polling and doing this thing. Right. In indirect connected mode, you control when it happens. But you can still do it. If I would have said you can automatically see it or something, maybe that would have been false, but it is true.
Is your demo still up?
It is.
Can you go back to Grafana?
Don't you just love Grafana? What a cool technology.
I do.
Yes. I have it here in the background. Yeah, here we go.
All right, let me see Grafana.
You want the SQL metrics?
I don't care. I just want some metrics.
Whoops. Just discard. Okay, here we go. Yeah. All
right. I'm going to ask the question that everybody gets asked by their manager. Can you export this to Excel?
I think you can.
What does that little save icon up there do? The 3D. Yeah, there you go. No.
I thought you could export Grafana.
Right click it and see what happens.
Right click it.
No, I meant one of the graphs.
Oh. It's images. But just to be clear, this is all based on data we're feeding in to Grafana. So I bet there's a way to do that.
I'll bet one of our audience knows if you can save the. Don't you build these gorgeous views, and then some manager goes, "You put that in Excel." I mean, Excel is the world database, right? Okay,
I'm sure there's a way we can figure out to give this to you in Excel.
Let's go back to Slideware.
Okay.
Bob, I think
that was a little bit off the script, Buck. A little bit, maybe
way off the script. So I will say this. You go back with SQL a long way, and I used version 1.0 as well. I'm with you.
Yep.
But no, you used it. Like I was at NASA at the time. I played with it. I used it on OS 2.
I supported it, actually. I supported it with customers, yes.
I was actually on System R, which was a mainframe database. But then, this thing came out, Microsoft and IBM got together and they made this OS 2 thing, and they made this character-based database, and it was a Sybase, Ashton Tate kind of thing. And they had the 1.0, and all about that. And I played with it and went, that's interesting. And I went back to my mainframe. But one of the things that I always did, because everything I worked with in technology was so expensive and I didn't make a lot of money. So I was always looking for free stuff, always. And boy, this thing came out called Solaris, and I played with that. I bought a Sun system and had it in my house from a junkyard. And I had this thing, and then this thing called Linux came out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want that. And so I got this Linux thing. It came on floppy disks, like dozens of them. Took hours or days to load it up and get it all ready to go. You had to compile the kernel. It was crazy. And then I started working with databases, and there weren't that many databases on Linux. But one of the early databases that was out there was called Postgres, or PostgreSQL is the language that it uses. It shares a lot in common with Oracle in that. So I loved Postgres. I really did. It's much more bolt-on than SQL Server. It's not as, in my mind, as complete, but you can add a lot of stuff to it. It has certain things that are kind of interesting. And so Postgres was a mature open source relational database, and it's even gotten more mature. And so there was a company out there called Citus, C-I-T-U-S, and Citus overcame one of the things that you couldn't do inside Postgres, sort of natively. And this was this idea of a hyperscale environment. And it allows you to do distributed tables out there. And you had one of three modes you could use. You had distributed tables. They look like a single table, but they're horizontally partitioned across nodes and fragments. They call them shards, just like we did back in the day. And there's a single column called the distribution column, and that determines the layout and everything else. The other thing they have inside this Postgres hyperscale world, and we have this as a service inside Azure. We bought the company Citus, and that's now an Azure service. You can run Postgres all day at large scale up in Azure as a service. We have these reference tables, and these are smaller tables, and they usually store like lookup type stuff. They're on every worker node because these things are involved in nodes, right? Obviously for being distributed. And then there's something called local tables, and this is non-sharded database, and that's only on the coordinator node. That's the main node that sends out everywhere else. You usually see the security stuff. There's also like some static things. You rarely join on that, and that's kind of important to note when we think about that. Now, on Kubernetes, when you start putting these kinds of things in Kubernetes, you really have to be careful with like storage classes and the type of application that you run. And so when you're thinking about using Postgres, one of the things you want to think about is if you host sort of a lot of multiple applications that are like dedicated to one client or maybe a location or something like that, and that might work well with a scale out environment. If the applications has a lot of tables or schemas that do online transaction processing, OLTP, or OLAP type workloads, you're familiar with the online analytic processing, they'll benefit from a scale out. And real-time applications that use a smaller number of tables but with aggregated analytic queries, or when they ingest a lot of data that doesn't change, immutable data, those work out well. Now, the interesting thing is, Bob, we have actually put this on Azure Arc enabled data services.
Really?
And so, yeah, it's in preview at the moment, but you can have SQL or you can have Postgres SQL if that's your deployment type. All the stuff you've been talking about with the management and all those things.
Using the data controller still, right? If we're also using the technology.
Everything's the same. The only difference is the database engine. That's the only thing that's different. And there's two primary interfaces that you use. You have GUIs, or graphical user interfaces, or CLIs, command line interfaces. And I always like to say, when people are asking me about which interface should I use, because again, I came from sort of a Unix and Linux background, I'm very used and comfortable with command lines. And I always say this: graphical interfaces are great for discovery and exploration. When I don't know there are system tables, I don't know to ask for them in a query. So a graphical interface will say, hey, there's something called a system table. I should go look at that. But when I want to standardize or automate or script something, obviously the command line can do it. Bob, I used to use when I would do DBA interviews, I would use a 5x5 question. I'd like 5 different databases with 5 different tables each, all different from each other, 5 different users in each of the 5 databases that have 5 different permissions into each of those tables. Go.
I'm so glad I never did an interview with you.
And so I let them go. And if they opened a graphical tool, whether I was hiring for Oracle back in the day or SQL Server, if they opened a graphical tool, I knew they were going to be there sort of all day. Right?
Yeah, of course.
If they opened a command tool though, and they wrote the first one and then just changed the names, I knew that we were in good shape. So we're in fact, we actually allow you to do both these things. Now you'll notice these are words and they're underlined. Obviously, people can't click on their screen right now. What I recommend you do is use a screen capture tool to grab this. Just use these as search terms, because in general, you can use all of these to do this. So
but I need to unpack something for a second. So I showed the architecture diagram, I showed the data controller, our Arc agents, Kubernetes, and I just focused on managed instance.
Right.
Are you saying that if I, not necessarily a SQL Server person, but I'm a Postgres person,
right,
I can do everything I just described to you, but just use Postgres?
That's right. And all the features it comes with.
And all the tools and languages and providers. Wait, are you suggesting now I'm a Postgres developer, the Postgres interfaces to write the code, it just works?
Yep, PG admin, PL SQL, PS SQL, excuse me, and all the rest of them, all those work.
But I get this hyperscale part of the whole idea.
You get the hyperscale Citus on premises if you want it.
Okay.
So if you have any of those application types we talked about a moment ago, they're going to benefit from this. That's the way this kind of works.
So if I like Azure Postgres Hyperscale in Azure, but I can't really run Azure, I really get that. I just run it in my infrastructure.
There you go.
Very nice. Very nice. Awesome.
So you get the best of, we just don't have to say no. So
Hello, Mr. Woody. Guess what?
I didn't put these in here. Hold on. I
put
don't
these
have
in
a
here.
knowledge check in my
I
notes.
put these in here. We get to test your knowledge.
Oh, that's not wise.
So guess what?
Oh,
Question number 1. You ready for this, Buckster?
Oh, no.
So
Okay.
BW, the real BW gets to ask the other BW the question. Here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. Now you'll have to monitor the poll for me, but I'm just going to ask the questions, okay?
All right.
Which of the following would be reasons to choose Azure Arc-enabled data services, PostgreSQL or Hyperscale over the Azure PostgreSQL Hyperscale service? The choices are A, the data must stay on premises.
Okay.
B, the system should be deployed from the Azure portal. Or C, the system must work with a graphical user interface or a GUI.
All right, so let's do a Bob process of elimination. So I'm gonna
let's let the audience also kind of.
I'm letting them do their thing, but I'm not gonna.
Yeah, no. We need to let the audience come in, but you, my friend, are on the hot seat.
Okay, well, the system must work with a graphical user interface. If we did that, all of my open source friends would not let me come to the secret meetings we have anymore. Okay. We don't actually meet.
So that isn't the reason why.
We don't like being around a lot of people, so we don't tend to meet, but you know what I'm saying. They would take away my t-shirt. Let's see. The system should be deployed. Choose Azure Arc-enabled data services over Azure. Oh, okay. Well,
if I see the question now, Arc versus Azure.
If it could just be, if I just need the Azure portal, then I could use either one. I'm going to have to go with A. So let me see what the audience said.
Yeah, what does the audience say? Do they agree with Chuck or not?
They're at 93% on A. So I think they got that one. You know, I think, Bob, what that says really when we look at this is that I'm a better instructor than you are, because they're getting more of mine right.
That's just hurtful. It's just hurtful. I thought there was a code of conduct at Ignite, you know.
No.
And here you are saying a hurtful thing like that. Okay, Buck, let's see how smart you are. Let's go to the second question.
Okay.
Which of the following is a good candidate, Mr. Professor, for an application that uses Azure Arc-enabled data services, PostgreSQL Hyperscale? Okay. And the choices are Azure Table Storage for A, Immediate for B, Real-time for C, and Secondary. So this is harder. Which of the following is a good candidate? So it's a little subjective now. Oh, I went to the previous one. Sorry, let's get back here. That was a faux pas. Let's leave that question up again. We want the audience to get a chance to answer it. And let's just see how good you really are.
Okay, so let's do Bob's process of elimination. Which is a good candidate for an application that uses Arc-enabled data services, PostgreSQL Hyperscale? Well, obviously, Azure Table Storage is something else completely, so that one's out.
Okay, we gave you a softball there. All right, it's fine.
Secondary feels, that's a very technical word. That sounds more SQL Server-y. So is that a word, SQL Server-y? So I'm gonna say D is not real. So we're between real-time and immediate for me anyway.
Okay.
I think what I said originally when I was talking about good candidate applications was real-time. I'm gonna go with C, real-time. Let me see what the audience says.
Let's see how the audience has done. Let's see how well you've taught them.
Okay, I wasn't as good this time.
Okay, all right. Was it a little bit of a harder question,
okay. Yeah, a little bit harder. Let's let them finish. It's coming in. It looks like 65% said real time.
Okay.
Followed by Azure Table Storage. Somehow I got that very wrong with them. Okay, I'll make a note. I didn't fail, though. That's just the way it sort of works. Bob, I think we've done a ton of information here so far. We've got like 5 minutes. Why don't we do this? Why don't you give us the announcements and then give us a summary and take us out. Show us where to go from here. So take it over for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, Buck, it's been a great session with you. It's always fun to interact with you. Luckily, the audience didn't have us on stage. It could have been really a bad situation. That would have been the case, right? But no, seriously, this is a really great technology, and it's a really key strategy at Microsoft in the Azure data team for us to be able to arc. Buck, I don't know if you know this or not, but arc is not like a circle, like a shape. Arc is arcing together.
Right.
Azure with your infrastructure. And
right.
That's what we call it Azure Arc. And this is one of the great services we're offering. So what we've done here recently is made some announcements here at Ignite as part of Arc Data Services. We have the general availability of direct connected mode. That was actually in preview up to this point.
Okay.
We have some enhancements to our point-in-time restore
Very cool.
with our services. We have some updates to the actual CLI for our Arc data extension. And if you've gone from general purpose, because, Buck, we've been generally available for a managed instance since the end of July.
Yeah.
If you started with a general purpose and you need to do an upgrade to business critical, we have a path for you to do that very seamlessly now. And for general purpose, now business critical is still in preview. So for our generally available service tier, which is general purpose, we've got in-place upgrade now in the July release. So now you don't have to worry about migration or anything of that nature. That's just some of the stuff we're working on. A lot of the team members that you are been interacting with today, folks, answering your questions, guess what? They own the product themselves. And I'm sure they've loved interacting with you, but they have so much stuff in the future to share with you. Yeah. I'm sure they'll bring us back at some point to, somehow mess it up. I mean, do a really good job of explaining how this technology works. That's just
so we got a couple minutes left. Let's do a summary here real quick.
Yeah, real quick, Buck. We talked about hybrid computing, why that can be a strategy that's important for you. We described Azure Arc Data Services. How does that fulfill that dream of hybrid computing? Yep. And then we drilled into the two services. We talked about the capabilities of managed instance, why it is platform as a service in your infrastructure.
Right.
And we talked about the same concept of that same management capabilities with Postgres, but we emphasize the fact that if you're a Postgres developer, this is just completely compatible, works from you right out of the gate.
Bob, show me where to go learn more, buddy.
Yeah, guess what? It's the Learn module. So you can use this QR code or go to this link right here, and this is a screenshot of the module. And don't forget that this is actually part of the learning path that we have across all of Azure Arc. So if you like this, the module's listed right here, but also we've got it listed at the bottom. So if you go to ak.ms Azure Arc Data, we created that link to go directly to our module. And if you go there, again, it's part of the learning path. So if you want to learn about Azure Arc Kubernetes or Azure Arc enabled servers, you can look at all of those modules together in one continuous training session. And then, gosh, just love the Jumpstart, guys. You want to go right
to go check it out.
It's amazing stuff. You want to do quick starting automation of any of these Azure Arc technologies, go right to Azure Jumpstart.
Absolutely. Bob, tell everyone goodbye.
Buck, it's been great being with you today. I enjoyed all of you. Thanks for all of you guys taking the time out of your busy day, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Yep.
Special call out, Buck, to our experts that have been helping us answer all the great questions on here.
Everybody, Dhananjay, everybody that's on. Thank you so much for everyone. And thanks, and enjoy the rest of Microsoft Ignite.